Good morning. It is 8:10 a.m. on Sunday, August 20th, 2017. I'm Christiana Ellis and I just got up. This is 5 more minutes. I have failed to sleep in a variety of circumstances, but it means that I'm here now to talk with you about Avatar: The Last Airbender, Season 3, Episode 12? Yes, entitled The Western Air Temple. And certainly it is, while last week was the conclusion of the two-parter that involved the invasion attempt on the day of the eclipse. It's kind of funny that we're 1 week off from the real solar eclipse happening here in our world, just as a fun coincidence. But so that was, big A plot stuff, as I've kind of talked about before. But in some ways, this episode, despite feeling much smaller, is just as momentous in that it represents a fundamental transformation of the relationship between the protagonists and what had previously been their antagonist, namely, obviously, Team Avatar and Zuko, who now joins Team Avatar. He's not fully accepted yet, to be sure. But for one, it's a fairly neat narrative trick that allows the Team Avatar and Zuko to be arriving at the Western Air Temple at about the same time, given that Azula doesn't pursue last week because Appa is able to fly faster than their airships. And so that leads us to suggest that Zuko, despite falling behind initially, is actually able to travel just as fast because Appa cannot fly all the time carrying so many people, which is, it's just kind of a neat element of saying, oh yeah, carrying twice as many people as usual is probably harder on Appa. It's at the same time, his flying has always been a little bit like, how does it work? Well, he does get tired, but he doesn't like flap or anything, so it's never been quite obvious exactly how that works, but whatever. So in any case, though, what that allows is for Zuko to already be in the area when the rest of the kids arrive. And we've got this whole episode kind of functions as a referendum on Zuko as a character, because of course we've been following his story since the beginning and watching his own internal struggles, but this episode kind of puts it in a different context of asking whether or not, because it's one thing for him to decide that he needs to change, but it's another to decide whether other characters can find it within themselves to forgive him and what he's done. And also to kind of recognize that, he's done things to other people besides them. So is it even fair for them to forgive him for things he did to other people? Well, I mean, we can see. We'll evaluate that. First, though, let's talk about how awesome it is that the Western Air Temple is upside down on a cliff face, with these upside down things that look like pagodas, but instead of actually being roof overhangs, they're actually the floors that you would walk on, the ledges. It's the sort of city that obviously would be nightmarishly impractical for anyone other than air nomads. Although it does occur to me just briefly here that while we've established in the other three tribes, the Earth Kingdom, the Northern and Southern Water tribes, and the Fire Nation, there are a lot of non-benders among the population. It raises the question of how many of the air nomads were actually not airbenders themselves and just, non-powered humans, because if there's any of them, then they would probably have a hard time getting around um, in a city designed like the Western Air Temple. But it's also always been obvious that the all we ever really saw of Airbender society was the monks, who seemed to all be benders. Um, but it also occurs to me we really didn't see a lot of women. So it's funny. This is occurring to me for the very first time. And there's a lot of unanswered questions about air nomad society that we'll probably never get the answer to. I wonder if some of the graphic novels cover that at all. Anyway, it's a very cool visual. And it's a nice reveal too, with Toph, feeling with her feet and saying, "Oh, we're here," and all the other kids are saying, "Oh, it's just a big crevasse." Oh goodness, I'm yawning. It's just a big crevasse. Your feet must be lying, but Aang knows, and so we pan down and built into the cliff face. It's just very cool. It's yet another impressive visual for this show. But so the kids climb down, and we've got Haru and Tio and the Duke eager to explore the temple, and we see a lot of them as they kind of come and go. Not a lot of their exploration. According to the Avatar wiki, the original intent for this episode was to have a little bit of a subplot of their explorations, but there's just not time. But it's fine because it's occasionally to have them show up again to remind us that they're there. But this episode's story really belongs to, our main four kids and Zuko. So as they're arriving, though, we have Zuko knowing what his plan is and feeling like he knows what he has to do, which is to join the Avatar. But he recognizes himself. He's not blind to how much he's done that would lead them to not trust him. And we see him practicing a speech, and it's kind of laughably awkward. "Hi, Zuko here." And this idea of having to go through and point out, like, "Well, I know that I pursued you relentlessly and hurt a lot of people in my attempts to capture you for a long time, but I'm nice now," that sort of thing. And just recognizing it's a tough sell. And in the meantime, he's flashing back to a time where he's apparently been at this temple before, and it's a nice. There's a nice symmetry to that, just because, first of all, it makes sense why he would be able to make his way here, even if he wasn't able to directly follow Aang here. So he had previously, immediately after being exiled by his father, had come here as one of the first places to look for the Avatar. And we haven't seen Iroh in a little while, and obviously Zuko is very keenly feeling the separation and the pain there, because a big part of his personal transformation was him wanting to apologize to his uncle, but he has not been able to because his uncle broke out on his own. And so what we see here is some nice parallel discussions of what it means to have a destiny, finding your own destiny versus having a destiny picked by someone else. And we can see that even very early on in Zuko's exile, Iroh was trying to counsel him to try to find his own path rather than just sticking to this idea that, oh, the father said you're exiled until you find the Avatar, so that's what you have to do so that you can go back, whereas Iroh is sensing that there's something more that needs to happen there. But early on in his exile, Zuko remembers how rude he was to his uncle, calling him lazy and that sort of thing. And so he's ashamed by the memory, which, as he kind of should be. but we know as the audience know that Zuko's change of heart is sincere, but it's also complicated, and that we get into that later, especially with Katara's reaction. So in the meantime, while Tio, Haru, and the Duke go off to explore the temple, the kids have to say, okay, so what's the plan? Obviously, our whole thing with the invasion on the eclipse has failed, and now we actually have a lot fewer, people in our larger army. So what's the plan? And Sokka suggests, well, the new plan should be the old plan, which was Aang was going to try to learn all 4 elements and then defeat the Fire Lord as a fully realized avatar. And I think that we are meant to feel that that's the right path, because along with Aang, we were given several places where in the preparations for this eclipse, it was meant to feel incomplete, like this can't be really the right way, and yet when you listen to your head, it seems like, well, rationally you have to press your advantage on this day, even if your heart's kind of telling you, but he's supposed to learn all 4 elements, that's supposed to be how you do it. And so returning to that plan feels right. But Aang is not in that headspace right now, right? Because that plan would require him to learn firebending, which he has built a kind of mental block for himself with, right? Not only did he lock his chi, preventing him access to the avatar state, but firebending was something he made a vow to himself to never do again, because of the time that he accidentally burned Katara. And even though everyone else seems to agree that learning firebending and becoming fully realized is the only path now, and Aang doesn't even disagree precisely, but he keeps kind of deflecting and wanting to go explore and not wanting to talk about it. The kids do discuss a little bit of like, well, he obviously needs a firebending teacher, but who could do it? And the only person that even kind of vaguely comes to mind is Zhang Zhang, who is the Fire Nation soldier that we met way back in the season 1 episode, The Deserter, which of course was the episode where Aang tried firebending, was very excited by it, but then in his enthusiasm and lack of caution accidentally burnt Katara and made his vow and so on. So obviously this is not a good situation, and the other kids, Katara and Sokka and Toph, are recognizing Aang's behavior at this point, that he is avoiding the issue and that that's not good. So they're trying to be nice about it, but they're pressing. And then this, of course, is where we end up with Zuko finally showing up and announcing his presence to them. And it's kind of a nice payoff that he actually does start his introduction exactly the same way as in his practiced awful speech. Hi, Zuko here. And we have this confrontation. He kind of tries to make the case that he's changed his mind. He's speaking pretty awkwardly about it, though. The kids are challenging him with all of these things that he's done, and they're fair criticisms. You burned down Kyoshi Island. You, sent pirates after them and did all of these awful things. Attacked their home village. He's done a lot of awful stuff, and he's trying to make the case that he did some good things too. But we can also see, first of all, we know that in many of those cases, it was his motivation at that time was really only like, I don't want someone else to get the credit because I need to be the one to do it. Even though, or at least that was his stated motivation. And we can look back now and see that some of that might have been more nuanced even than we realized. But one of the big things that for Katara is kind of the deal breaker for her is that she recognizes that back when she and Zuko were imprisoned in the Earth Kingdom, he talked about maybe doing the right thing then. Like, he wavered, he was unsure and confused. But then when the time came, he made the wrong decision. And so from her perspective, it doesn't matter what he says now because he said the right things then and told this whole story about his mother, and she made her feel sorry for him, and then still chose the Fire Nation. So from her perspective, we can see how she's reacting kind of out of hurt feelings and the betrayal that she felt from that moment. And we know that his journey is more complicated, but from her perspective, that's a tough thing to get past. So they're initially really pushing back, mostly Katara and Sokka, not so much Toph, but she has less emotional investment in that chase anyway because she didn't join until later, after Zuko was no longer this Terminator after them all the time. So she's in a perspective to be able to look at this thing a little bit more impartially, not to mention having a lie detector feed. But the rest of the kids tell him, no, you have to leave, you can't join us. Zuko offers himself as a prisoner, but even that isn't okay, and Katara actually knocks him over with waterbending to drive him away. And so Toph actually tries to tell everybody, are you guys really thinking about this clearly? We were just talking about how Aang needs a firebending teacher, and now one has showed up, and he's being sincere, and you guys won't even talk about it. And so it's an interesting dilemma for us to observe these kids in, because on the one hand, we know that Zuko really has changed, and in fact, the way he left pretty much means that he can't really go back at this point. And so we know he's sincere, and I think that in our hearts we all sort of know, whether destiny is real or not, he is the one that should teach Aang firebending. I think that's, we as viewers feel that. But we can also very much understand how Katara and Sokka and Aang would feel about that, because Zuko was the constant wolf at their heels for a long time. And almost everything he ever did, you could make the case of, well, did he really have good motives at that time, or was it more complicated than that? So Aang remembers the time where Zuko dressed as the Blue Spirit and helped him escape from Admiral Zhao's prison, and that's where Aang's hesitation comes in, and he's just remembering that Zuko was more complex than he realized at that time. But Katara makes the fairly good point of like, well, did he only do that so that he could get the glory for himself? And we know the answer to that is at least mostly yes. And it was that was certainly Zuko's motivation going into that episode. And I think it was really only over the course of that episode that Zuko started to have any other thoughts. But we can also remember that it was after that that Zuko kidnapped Aang's unconscious form away from the ritual at the North Pole and nearly got them both killed. And then, of course, we have all of the other things that Zuko's done, people that he hurt in his path, trying to chase after Aang. And then the one thing that Zuko did that he, that is harder for anyone to explain, is that he released Appa. And the kids know how crucial that was in that moment. He saved them from, I'm forgetting the name of the Tylee's boss, but that was a crucial moment, and they can't really come up with an ulterior motive for that. But at the same time, it's easy to spin that in context with everything else as just like, okay, well, he didn't do every single bad thing he possibly could have, and so therefore, that's not a good enough excuse. And then it's unfortunate too that Zuko kind of can't help but let it slip that he sent the assassin after them, which they hadn't realized was his fault, and so now they're extra mad. And of course, that's a reminder for us that that guy's still out there, so that when he shows up again, we remember, oh yeah. It is tough though, with her, she has less emotional investment, and so she is more able to consider that it's possible he could be helped. And so it's this fascinating escalation of tensions though, where we have this opening where it seems like maybe Toph will be able to talk to him and she'll be able to be the intermediary to negotiate this thing. But then, because she kind of sneaks up on his camp and he's, and so keyed up that he reacts without thinking, ends up burning her feet, which is a big deal for her, scares her away. And even though she recognizes that he didn't mean to do it, he's shouting apologies after her as she escapes, it's still more of a case of like, even if he is sincere, can he control himself? Is he the right person to try to bring into their midst if he can't control himself better? But of course, this is where they're talking about this, and it's kind of a neat thing that Toph is so kind of handicapped by having her feet burned that she can't really easily make it back, and so it takes all night for her to get back, and then she ends up having to like tunnel through a rock in an area that she wouldn't normally have because she can't really see. And Katara tries to heal her feet, but there's kind of some hand waviness about, because she wasn't able to heal them right away, that's incomplete and that sort of thing. Fine. But of course, on cue, Combustion Man shows up again, and the kids are in a very precarious situation here because the nature of this temple is such that these structures can't take a lot of punishment before it might just blow the whole building off the side of the cliff, and that's really bad. And so they're in a really tough spot. But there is a moment where they specifically see Zuko intervene, attempt to stop him, and get blasted off a cliff himself as a result. He saves himself by hanging on to some convenient vines. Sure, why not? But there's that moment where they see that he puts himself in danger to try to undo his mistake. But there's still Combustion Man to deal with, and even though, let's say that Sokka's boomerang throw seems incredibly and implausibly lucky, it is very cool the strategy that they build into it, the idea that he is able to watch a few of the shots and triangulate them to conclude where Combustion Man must be standing, and then throw his boomerang to do that. But the idea that he made that blind shot a long way away, hit him, and then the boomerang comes back to his hand. Yeah, I don't care really, but yeah, that's kind of not how boomerangs work. Still, it was very cool, and to have it hit Combustion Man right in his tattoo again, which means that when he attempts to use his powers again, he blows himself up, and as far as we can tell, he's probably dead, given that this whole structure he was on fell into the cliff, and we see his metal arm sort of fly towards the camera, detached, which, we don't see a body, obviously, but that seems fairly clear that he's probably dead. So in any event, now, with at least a little bit of extra redemption, they're more convinced that Zuko is sincere, but there's still a valid question of should they bring him in. And Aang, it's nice to see Aang mature enough to start with this idea of I'm open to this now, but I need to ask my friends. Toph, who of course was never the most opposed to this to begin with, jokes that it's like, I have to be able to get back to you for burning my feet, haha. Sokka is coming from a place of being, like, well, this seems like it could help with our plan. It could make us stronger and make us more likely to be able to beat the Fire Lord. And so on that basis, Katara is the one that it's harder because she has, as we previously mentioned, forged a previous emotional connection with Zuko that was betrayed. So she grudgingly concedes and says, Aang, if you think that this is the right thing to do, I'll go along with it. But then, as we see, the end of the episode has kind of a dark turn where, really, in no uncertain terms, Katara approaches Zuko and says, you better watch yourself, because if you try to hurt Aang, I will kill you. I mean, she uses slightly different words, but it's not unclear what she means. She is not saying, I will hurt you. She is not saying, I will drive you away. She's saying, I will end your destiny permanently. That's intense. But Katara is intense, and this is serious business. So, that said, I think that although we can understand Katara's reservations, as a viewer, yay, Zuko's on Team Avatar now, woo! But it's actually not, one of the things that leads Aang to be more open to Zuko is Zuko's recognition when apologizing for burning Toph's feet to say that, fire is a dangerous element and I need more self-control in order to keep from hurting people I care about. And because that resonates so directly with what Aang had felt about firebending, he can't help but think we need to practice the same thing, and that feels meaningful. And so, sure enough, next time we will see more about learning firebending from an episode called The Firebending Masters. So, I'll be back next week for that episode, and in the meantime, I will talk to you tomorrow for 5 more minutes.